So we can start anytime, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to bring the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee meeting to order. Please note we're being recorded.
And I will bring the Concord School Committee meeting to order. I note the same.
So first order of business, we have,
Well,
yeah.
Do we need a roll call attendance because we're Zoom?
If you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Attendance, I'll call out names. Rainey.
Aye.
Booth.
Present.
Safi.
Aye.
Boat.
I'm here.
Modell.
I'm here.
Johnston. I.
So why do we never did this in the past?
Is that new?
It's been a Zoom protocol for a couple of weeks for us, I think. Yeah.
Good.
What's the purpose of it?
Just because of the uncertainty of who's here, given the fact that we're not all visible at any one time. That's all.
Got it.
It might be, David, because we can't see your face.
Yeah, but I don't have any shades. I don't know what to do. You know, I was thinking that maybe I'll do like the newspaper. I'll put up the newspaper from today, so you know.
Right. If your voice sounds like Mickey Mouse along the way, it's going to be a problem. So first order of business is a reading of the minutes. We have one set from a joint meeting on 5/15/20. Can I have a motion to accept these minutes for both?
So move for both?
A second?
Second for
Does anybody have any comments or edits? We'll take a roll call to approve. All those in favor? Rainey?
Aye.
Booth?
aye.
Stuffy?
Aye.
Bout?
Aye.
Modell?
Aye.
Johnston, aye. And we didn't put chairs reports in here. I don't know that we need to, unless Heather, you or Court want to say something about the building committee. It's different
No.
from Friday.
No, nothing new since Friday.
Correct. Yeah, and that includes correspondence. We haven't had any since Friday to the building committee, I don't believe.
Okay. We've had a piece of correspondence since last week that I can think of, which was basically just congratulating everybody and thanking everybody for everything that's being done for seniors to recognize graduation.
And I've had, just to mention, I know I forwarded one to everybody, but I've had, I think, 3 or 4 different texts or emails mentioning the amazing drive-bys and congratulations by the administration, and people saying, please pass on our appreciation. This is incredible. You know, they were out there, they weren't just delivering signs, they were going and congratulating every single senior and spending a few minutes with each one. It's pretty amazing.
We have we have twins across the street who are seniors, and bus pulled. I'm like, what's a bus doing out there?
So great.
I must
They're
have
going
missed
to have logged about 30 hours on the road to
Yeah.
accomplish all of that before they're done.
Wow.
So, but they're loving every minute of it.
That's great.
The weather has cooperated for the most part.
Yes,
Yeah.
it has. Absolutely.
As a parent of a senior, awesome. Was
Good.
Thank
good.
you.
That's great.
I was thinking we just aren't having school committee meetings often enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so Heather, anything else?
No, that was it.
Okay, so why don't we move right along to reports for discussion and phase 4 remote learning.
Although one's better for us.
So I think we're just picking up where we left off on Friday. I reposted the same document that you were looking at with the proposed description of the advisory committee. I think we were going to revisit that and talk on any other ideas you had about it. I think the only update really since Friday is some soft roll out to the staff to just start saying, let's talk about phase 4. We haven't been making any plans or anything like that. A little bit of brainstorming exchange just to get conversations started, which already is proving really valuable, I think. But nothing more formal than that. And those have all happened just in regularly scheduled meetings with departments or schools or leaders or anything we've already had on there. So not much more to share than, I think you were considering a vote tonight to formally create the committee. So the vote's listed here as well. And probably some discussion on who from the school committee was going to participate directly, knowing that everyone on the committee will hear updates on an ongoing basis, but we do need a couple of people to formally engage. So I think that's stuff.
Yeah, I would agree.
And that'll be a bit of a conversation because we do have 3 people who have expressed interest. So should we save that for conversation for action items, or do you want to take it up now? We can do it either way.
Maybe,
Either way.
maybe we do it both times. Take it up now and then discuss it and then
Yeah. And then vote on it. And
have a few minutes to reflect before we vote. I have taken pen to paper and put together a possible charge or mission. Haven't shared it with anybody. We could do so tonight if you're interested. I would suggest that we do some work on what a charge means, what the charge is before we establish this, even though there's a lot in what we saw on Friday and it very much reflects what we discussed prior. I don't think we've seen a charge per se. The other, I think, critical element is whatever the school committee does by way of a task force or advisory group to try to look at the complexity of life for the next year. We want to make sure that our effort is, synchronized or tied up or even very synergistic with whatever is going to happen through the professional leadership, Lori and her team, so that we're serving her purposes as well as the school committee's purposes. Because even though this is going to take a lot of energy, we don't have extra energy and extra time. So I think we've got to have it synced up with, again, Lori, your perspective on what planning means. I assume that the overlap is going to be a very comfortable one, what the school committee wants to do and what you want to do, or in both cases need to do. But let's take a careful look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Just one clarification point for me. I thought what we were doing was selecting 2 members to be on a committee that the superintendent's putting together to work on phase 4, rather than the committee actually creating an advisory committee for this. I don't remember us having a discussion about having a school committee, advisory committee, or task force specific to phase 4. I thought what this referred to was us having a couple of members on a committee that was being created. So I'll ask.
Well, I guess I think we should open that up to the committee and see what's best for the school district, because that's what we're all about. What's going to work best in these times for the school district. It was my assumption, and I'll use that word, it was my assumption this was a school committee by virtue of the fact that A, we were forming it, and B, it was going to report to us at every meeting. So inherent in that was a school committee undertaking, I thought.
Lori, can you clarify what's on your mind for this?
Yeah, I mean, and we didn't really so that's why it's feeling ambiguous. I had proposed it in the same mindset of the other two advisory committees that I have in in old times, sustainability and safety, which that was the model I was paralleling it off of, where there's school committee representation and then a wide range of stakeholders at the table as well. And we just do deeper talks at those committee meetings and then share back with the school committee at large. So that was what I paralleled it off of. I think it sounds like you all need to talk through what your vision is here. So that was my mindset, but I didn't say that out loud when we met Friday.
That was my understanding as well. It was just that it was similar to one of those that's an advisory group that you were creating, Laurie. I mean, we don't want to get too stuck on semantics, but I think that one of the differences just in executing, to me, starts to come down to efficiency. But I don't know if that's the only difference here. If it's a committee that, or not a committee, if it's an advisory group that the superintendent has created for herself on which we have representation, my understanding is then you're not dealing with posting agendas and kind of some of the hoops that we have to jump through for a school committee created group. So to me, I mean, that's one advantage, because this is a group that needs to be able to work quickly and efficiently and get together on a dime, possibly when necessary. And I don't want to be holding that up by making it something that we've created and then we're creating extra hoops to jump through. If there's no other difference, I guess.
I think the one other difference that I just want to be sure my intentions are very clear. Certainly the public needs to know what this committee is talking about. So if it's not an open meeting the way this is, and a subcommittee would be, we definitely need to make it accessible to the community and be regularly sharing out and many of those same elements, but maybe without the strict process that is required of a subcommittee.
Well, it wouldn't be a
My
subcommittee.
2 cents here.
Who
I think
aren't.
more than just semantics. We proceed with this. And if we do not have a public subcommittee of the school committee, we have to put in much more clear ways for the public to participate, which right now is extremely difficult. We're not allowing public comment at our meetings. I'm not saying we're not allowing it, but we haven't opened that up yet. So I think we have to put in place some timeline with forums where the stakeholders can be present, where the community can ask questions. And I think we need a better conduit, even with representation from the school committee, information flowing back and forth. So that's not really, I think we need to get clarification on that before I could even vote for it. A little more structure into how, or a commitment that will be made clear in the next 2 weeks or so the community can understand how this work is going to proceed.
I don't know that it needs to be all that complicated. It can't be a subcommittee, first of all, because it has non-school committee members on it. So it would be an advisory.
I don't know. Are you sure? Well, are you sure of that?
Yeah.
I thought the ruling was it is a subcommittee if you have two
No, you
members of
can
the
have
deliberative body, no matter
an
who else.
advisory group of an advisory committee of the school committee, and that would include school committee members and non-members.
Well,
Subcommittee.
I don't want to belabor the point, but wasn't the Attorney General's thing with whoever was in Concord all about that there were two people from some group that met regularly in some other group and wasn't being posted as a subcommittee? I thought that was the whole basis of that.
That was a group, that was two people from within a large committee that were meeting. And so, yes, it should have been called a subcommittee.
There were other people, but Heather, there were other people from other committees or other people anyway who were on that group. And that's, the AG said, you've created a subcommittee. That was that whole thing. I think you created a subcommittee. When you put two...
I have very little doubt about the subcommittee advisory committee thing. We've done this several times, and
I leave it to you guys, but
I think I've got it pretty clear.
Okay.
either one is subject to open meeting law.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
And I think what was happening in the other scenario was there was no committee formed, and there was no open meeting process for it.
Right, so it has to be,
Thought to be an informal process, but you can't do that,
right. you
which is
can't
what
do
we
it.
learned about that, if I remember the scenario correctly.
I think that's,
Can we
I sent
check
you
with
a
the town
email
clerk on this?
Pardon me?
Can we check with the town clerk?
Well, you can. I'm telling you, I'm 99% sure of this process.
Well, I think we can check with the town clerk, but I think there's the larger question. Do we want to flatten communication, which this effectively does? Do we want to accelerate communication and planning? This effectively does. And do we want to make it more transparent? I've been beating that same drum for a few meetings now. I would say yes to all three. If this group, whatever we want to call it, does that, then I'm going to support it.
So I think the approach here is to follow open meeting law, right, Lori?
Well, if you've got a formal committee that must follow it, then we will follow to the T. Otherwise, we would follow it based on the structures that you're looking and hoping for. A forum, obviously, you don't post open meeting notices, things like that, but you would be all about getting community input. So I think it's just a matter of what structure you want to use. I think the intentions are all the same, whether you want to be on the formal open meeting law posting requirements or allow the school committee to direct the advisory committee on the structures they want to use. I think we're all on the same page. It's just a matter of how you get there.
Yeah. I
So
think
just to clarify, if it's a committee of yours, Lori, and it's not, even if it's not subject to open meeting laws, you could hold any of those meetings openly and let other people
Oh,
attend,
sure.
right? I mean, they can always be open.
Of course.
I think if we were going to have school committee members as members of the committee versus as observers, then it would have to be a committee, and it would have to be subject to open meeting law.
If we're deliberating as part of that group.
Otherwise, what David was just talking about.
I think, yeah, well, I believe Wally is correct.
Okay.
I believe
That's the case.
one person from this school committee could join and not.
Yes, right.
Two people creates deliberation, yes.
Yeah.
So that maybe answers your question right there.
Right.
So I think, I guess my only concern about this is that I sort of view this as an effort by leadership, by district leadership, to bring the parties together necessary to have open and detailed dialogue about how to proceed on phase 4 and prepare for the fall. If we're going to create an advisory committee, which it sounds like we probably want to do so that a couple of school committee members are members, I think I would still like to see us allow the process of that to be really more driven at the direction of the superintendent than the school committee, because we're going to be into things on this that the school committee very seldom would get involved in. We would know about it. We would, things would be brought to us for edification. But this, when the day is done, is about creating effectively a pedagogy around education for the fall, and some of the structures that'll have to be in place for transportation and that sort of thing, but they're really not specific school committee notions to be considered and voted on and discussed. In total, they would be. So that's, I mean, that's the way I see this. I don't know that we bring much to the table in the process of what this committee is going to be discussing day in, day out. So certainly I don't think, I'm not equipped to be determining what the pedagogy and the curriculum is going to look like in the fall based on what we're going to try to deliver on a remote basis. I think that's something I would prefer to see the professionals do and come to us with updates, which we could then have comments on, have discussion on. If there's some things that we collectively are concerned about, then we would express those and ask for some further consideration of the way it's being done.
So I think there will be things that we bring to the table in terms of the logistics around a lot of that, timing, budget, that kind of thing. But to your point, a lot of it is stuff that should be driven by Lori or the administrative team. So what if it's, I mean, to me, it comes down to maybe it's an advisory committee that's created by Lori, but we follow all of the open meeting laws because two of us are a part of it. Or it could be a committee that's jointly created by the superintendent and the school committee. And the superintendent is still kind of the driving force behind a lot of the discussions because really Lori is the spoke of the wheel here in terms of all of the different factors that come into play. Does that make sense?
Does to me. I think part of this is going to be, I'm just looking quickly here to see. So there's 2, 5, 8 people away from the school committee members, 8 people who have to be determined rather than are in place by title. And I think it would be a lot smoother if those people were determined by the superintendent, run them by us. Otherwise, there's a big process involved in selecting people to be on an advisory committee. And I think the goal here is to get this up and running fairly quickly. So I'd be concerned about how we would go about getting a list of people to then consider for these 8 slots, which would be 3 parent reps, CTA and CCTA reps, which would, I assume, be brought to us by the teachers associations, and then 2 high school students. So it's really 5 that we'd be selecting. And I think in the interest of being life, it's probably worth letting this come together. We can get a report on it.
I agree. I think that makes sense. We don't want to hold up the creation of this so much by saying that we have to vote on every step of the creation process.
If the school committee does not establish this, the superintendent certainly has the prerogative, the latitude to do so on her own, as she has with other groups that she's pulled together to advise her, not the school committee. Let's not too quickly assume that the membership is what we've looked at, because we haven't discussed it. I would suggest that on parent reps, we make certain that we have a Carlisle parent rep in the mix. And if that means a 4th parent rep, I think that'd be sensible.
Yeah, good point.
So let's take a look at that list. If indeed we're setting up a committee or advising Lori before she moves on this, if that's the intent of the committee.
I have When we're initially discussing this last week, it was we're talking more of just setting up a task force, and there was a talk of including a CPAC member, or actually two members. Usually there are two members serving on a committee, one for region and one for Concord, representing CPAC. So I wonder if that person, those two people will be included. I know talking to CPAC board, there is already a member stepping up, at least one stepping up, interested in participating in those discussions and lending a voice for those families. And on the Carlisle side, I've reached out to my superintendent and asked, what would be useful and what would be helpful to both districts. How as a task force participant, if a task force participant would actually, from a school committee, would be able to bring some sort of value to the whole process. And the thing that I am seeing is that we will have discussions on the region that we will have to coordinate with Carlisle. So that's why I was thinking about coming forward, because we having some cross-sharing of information back and forth, understanding what are the challenges that Concord is going through, and what Carlisle is seeing, and if there are places where we can pull our resources and serve our students or teachers. And I know that Jim O'Shea and Dr. Laurie Hunter are already are talking about how they can coordinate the response to the challenges going forward with some students being online, some students being coming actually to school. So my big question as to Hunter is, what role does she see to from the school committee to be actually helpful in this process? What can we bring to the table that would be the most advantageous in this process?
Oh, sure. I mean, to the points of several things are absolutely directly under your discretion, and calendar would be the one that stands out to me the most. And to me, in this environment, schedule and calendar are all one thing, because if we've got kids not all coming to school at once, that's completely going to be under your umbrella as to how we structure that. I don't see that we can separate those two things. Budgetary wise, staying close to what's going on here is going to matter greatly. So that obviously is a nice fit that this information flows to all of you. And then just the general overall large picture. I think we go back to where we were with phase 3 was a great example of just really giving you the proposed options and talking on maybe what this advisory group would recommend. And then bringing you sort of how they might lay out, and to different degrees depending on the topic. I think schedule and calendar stands out as the biggest challenging and huge impact to everyone, and that I think does fit under yours. And then a number of the others, there's certainly a lot of information flow that has to happen as it feeds into. I think David said to me back when we first closed, strategic and operational overlap all over the place, and the school lists the strategic, but at this point, much of the operational is strategic. So I think just making sure that information flow is really thorough, and that we're all staying on going in the same direction, and that there's opportunities for feedback and comments and edits and revisions before we make final decisions. That's my vision.
Thank you for that. I think it's important to note that whatever we call this, this is necessary work that's going to happen. However we structure it, it's necessary work that's going to happen. I've looked at other districts, and some of them are taking a more active sort of framing of what's happening, and they call it planning, not advising. To suggest that these people really have a very active role in some very essential planning. Couple of things I'd like to add to what we've talked about over the last couple of meetings and saw on Friday by way of the memo, and that is that the educational approaches, I think, are going to be perhaps more complex than we initially spelled out. It might be reopening with students and staff physically in the building, but it might be remote teaching for everybody. It might be a hybrid schedule where we've got some classroom-based and some remote. It might be some remote learning full-time for at-risk students. And it's going to be necessary to be able to pivot from one to another. So this says that we're dealing with external threats, if you will, environmental conditions that are not of our making or under our control. So I think we're going to have to be ready for all of those scenarios. And then we're going to have to accept that we're doing work. Well, we don't know what the governor is going to say tomorrow. We don't know what DESE is going to say tomorrow. We don't know what our local public health is going to say tomorrow, and we're going to have to be responsive to that. But all of this, I think, readies us for that. The question, two questions for you, Lori. In your ideal scenario, given what we know and don't know, would you hope to have some semblance of a solid plan for opening scenario A, opening scenario B, opening scenario C, and so on by what, mid-July? I'm just making that up. I don't know, but we've got to pick some target and work toward it and know that we're going to work the day after also because things are going to change. But we've got to have some hope for a plan and a blueprint that we can share. And then secondly, to what degree do we bring in summer resources by the way of teachers and others who would not otherwise be working? So we've got to do some budget shifts for that. A lot of these people are 12-month people or volunteers, but a few aren't. So I think you're going to have to move on all of that as well. So again, dates, do you have an idea of when you'd like to be able to sleep at night knowing you had a blueprint?
Yeah, I definitely, and I guess in my perfect world, there'll be a little more information as we move our way through this. But yes, we need plans for all of those contingencies. I would say somewhere between July 15th, no later than August 1st. That would be pushing the outer limit, I would think. In terms of what we need, availability for teachers and such, we're trying to figure that out. I haven't started to figure it out till we had finished this conversation. The teachers asked today, the ones I was on with, if we were going to be asking for their input throughout the summer. Some of them, certainly that will be the case. So we'll have to talk on what that looks like in terms of some budgetary. The message Jared and I have been sending to everyone is that the hope is there'll be reallocation of funds more than additional funds as our priorities have shifted so much. We're still at a really high level of that work, but that's the goal, is that we'll use funds we had thought we were going to use for another purpose that perhaps isn't going to be the priority anymore and reallocate it towards whatever's needed in phase 4 here. But we're trying to work through all that and start to make those lists. So that will inform our budget conversations as we go into the next month or so.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, clearly we'll need some access to this group of people for sure. Also, throughout the summer, I expect there'll be some working groups at each level of these discussions that probably also have to have some in between the advisory groups meetings kind of discussions so that the nitty gritty stuff gets talked about. So the advisory committee can respond to the option sets for each of those categories that's listed on this document and others that aren't there yet. So I think there's an ebb and flow throughout.
I went to the, Corey, you look like you want to say something.
Well, just I looked over the list of different planning activities, and I would simply throw a few out for consideration a specific emphasis on SEL, a specific emphasis on staff support planning, because I think staff is going to require a level of support that we've not rehearsed for. And what else did I put in here? I think we could call out specifically technology as an area where we're going to have to bring in some very specialized expertise to talk about what that's going to look like in terms of hard, soft, and instructional support around tech.
I was going to say,
I can get all of these to Lori in a memo.
Sure. And I've gathered a few. The union presidents gave me a couple others we need to talk on. I didn't know if you wanted to do it here or once the group started to form. So that's another layer of discussion.
I quickly looked at the policy manual for advisory committees, and it's fairly prescribed as to, what needs to be done by the committee to create what we're talking about. And as I think about this, and I think we've talked about this is going to be fairly fast moving, free ranging. There may be somewhere, between school committee meetings where this group meets and decides they need to pull somebody in from the fire department. And, we would have to go through a process to approve that person if we were going by the letter of the policy and the...
No, Wally. They can certainly bring in anybody they want and have them talk. They just
have them talk, but if they wanted to bring them in as part of the working group. So my feeling is I think we'd be better off letting the superintendent form a task force here. We have 2 or 3 members on it. We could have 3 members on it as long as, I think we're going to have to go back and take a look at that. But this is a little more complicated than I think we thought about it going in. If we're going to be purely adhering to the policy manual relative to advisory committees.
Well, I'm prepared to move one way or another because I think we've got to get these small groups together that have the expertise necessary to put together alternative scenarios and then see how they merge together as a single and comprehensive plan that can guide us. I call it blueprint. Wally, I would agree with Cynthia. This group should be able to bring in any source of expert information they want, and information is different than appointment to a committee. Let's keep those two very separate.
Absolutely, and I was not referring to information. I was referring to bringing somebody in to serve in the group and be part of what's going on.
I think a lot of the expertise that might be available would be in the form of people who say, happy to offer what I can, but don't put me on another committee.
So just to be clear, the school committee members can only observe and not participate if we don't have a public committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the problem here.
Yes.
That's why that's what I sort of meant by it being complicated. I mean, we could put just trying to think of how we would do this. We would have to create, if we do an advisory committee, we have to create a charge. We have to, we appoint the members of the committee, which we can do, based on a group given to us by the superintendent. And, just as we have right here, we've sort of added a couple of people who weren't on the list there. And then I think the charge would would want to be fairly open so that the group had a lot of flexibility as to, what I was looking at and considering.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
If we just had one member of the committee, does this problem go away? Does it just become Lori's committee?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why don't we just go for one? Why are we making it so complicated?
We could have one member and a couple of people could be observers.
Yeah, I
Good
mean,
idea.
I think
The
we're
group can always call
overcomplicating.
on, I think the group can always call on people who are observing to make comment.
I mean, I think it's too much mechanics. I think the point is, I believe the point is that Lori needs a wide swath of opinions and expertise and be fairly nimble to a fluid situation. So, certainly school committee should have a voice, but I think we should keep it as simple as possible and just have a single regular member.
I think that's a pretty good suggestion, especially if another one or two can observe. It could be the most efficient way to do it. The downside is that it's one versus two or three, of course. But to David's point, I agree that the point of this is to have a nimble source of input and information for the superintendent, not to create a lot more hurdles to get everything done.
Yeah, and I don't know that in the end, and I think, Lori, this is something you have to think about. The things we have here are not necessarily things that should have to come to a consensus of a committee that's going to then vote on something to put out to the school committee if it's an advisory committee. Some of these things ultimately are your decision to make based on the input that you get from wherever you get it. And the goal here is to be able to give you the vehicle to gather information from a broad swath of people. And some of the have, like if you look at health services, maybe that's a bad one given what we're talking about here, but if you're looking at health services, then there aren't necessarily people in this group who are skilled in that, and ultimately it's a decision you're making about staff, most likely. Those are your decisions to make and bring to us in the form of budget requests and that sort of thing. So I would think about that, I guess, as you go through the things that are going to have to be considered, and what the point of this group is. When we had a campus advisory committee, a lot of work was done, and people talked about things and made, kind of came to consensus about what to put forward to the school committee. And we had formed it for the purposes of gathering a lot of information and having discussion that was more detailed than we would do in a school committee meeting.
Right.
This is going to evolve as time goes on.
No
Because
question.
there are going to be a lot of ideas that people in this group would have, and then people who want to send in comments to us from the community. Members of the school committee may have comments and input. And like I said, some of these are going to be your decision to make. They really aren't the kind of thing that should be decided by an advisory committee.
Yeah, I think just given the complexity of all of this, this was a vehicle to get all of that feedback and the ideas and I've been describing it to the leaders as, like the umbrella, that everything has to complement each other because there isn't actually anyone you can pull out and do in isolation. So really that big picture group that can see how it's all fitting together, but also debate as appropriate, debate where there are some things that are harder to decide. I think there's some really challenging decisions to be made there in terms of what are our safety practices and how do we operationally make those decisions of how we social distance kids, and just in the physical way we move kids around a building even is going to have complexity to it. So just making sure we've got all the different perspectives as we weigh the options for what is going to be, essentially rebuilding the structure of a school day and the curriculum that goes with it. So more the think tank model, for lack of a better word, of, how do we keep all these decisions with all the complexities to them? We've got educators, we've got health professionals, we don't really have people with the background in the health, to be the educators. The closest, obviously, are the school nurses, but how do we make sure that all those right perspectives are weighed? And the pros and cons. There's going to be pros and cons in almost every decision from what I can see, and a place where those pros and cons are discussed and vetted and bounced around with some representative.
Right. And of course we are hoping, and I think we all really hope that we have pretty strong statewide guidance. The states around us are all pretty much going through the same situation. So New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, we're all very similar.
Yeah.
We're going to have different approaches, but I don't think we need to depend on any local citizens to have the big picture where we are with COVID-19. We then need to figure out how to execute that.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So I just wanted, Lori, what do you need from us today if we're leaning toward a group that you would really decide what membership needs to be there, whether it be 29, 35, what have you, what you see as an appropriate group, and then you don't need to have a quorum or anything like that. In fact, I would think that meetings would be focused, not trying to boil the thing every week, or however frequently you want to meet. And I think any school committee member who's not the member should be an observer. So we don't have to pick and choose. That anybody should be able to observe this meeting. I don't think it should be, you have to be one of three people who can observe. If we're not participating and voting, I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, no, that's right. I agree.
That's
Totally
good.
agree. I think from all of you, I need, just the support to say, go ahead and get started. It is going to ebb and flow, and I think that's good. That's what we are going to need. And I think, there'll be ebbing and flowing at the advisory level, and then there'll be ebbing and flowing with all of you, and there'll be other places generating information for both groups to respond to. So the fluidity, I think, makes really good sense. And that might even include the membership, because down the road, we'll get in and go, we really would benefit from having such and such a representative here all the time to just hear feedback and, respond to different aspects of the things we're trying to figure out. So I think if you're supportive in general, we can get things going, and then just do a lot of frequent check-ins on how it's working and what tweaks it needs. And if there's a time and place where it really should be more of a formal subcommittee, a school committee, advisory committee, because as it goes forward, we realize that feels more appropriate, we could always change it. So
Well, there may be aspects of it that would require something like that. We may, as this goes along, we as a committee may see aspects of it of this or something ancillary to it that we feel we should be more involved in.
I'm going to come back to the same point I already made. The calendar and the schedules, I think, is going to be the one for when we're not all in school together, which, who knows, could be a good portion of the year. I think that's, I could parallel. We have a contractual group that meets with a school committee member and representatives from the two teacher unions, and we do a lot of the hard work on the calendar there, and then bring a recommendation to all of you. So to me, that's the one I see being the most challenging, because there's nothing going to have more impact on families, teachers, and our overall school year than whatever we decide for when we need hybrid plans for school calendars and things like that. Things that perhaps might not be at the direction of the state, in terms of if my here's my example. If the state says you can't have all of the kids in school, if there's a certain contagion of illness going on, but they don't prescribe what it looks like. Is it every other day? Is it every other week? Is it half days? That's a huge, huge local decision. And I'm not sure the state's going to be that prescriptive. I'm not sure they can be, because different districts are going to have so many different needs. So
But Lori, don't you think that similar districts are executed in a similar way? I mean, for the most.
well, yep, absolutely. We're all going to be having the same conversations. The question is, do we all come to the same outcomes, or do we all group to try to come to the same outcomes, which is what some of my colleagues and I have been talking about, because obviously the trickle down is enormous. If teachers are living in a neighboring district and their kids are home and we're in school, and so lots of implications there for sure.
And I think that's a good example of where, even if you start this as a superintendent's task force, we might find down the line that we need a subcommittee focused on one aspect of what that task force is looking at. And that could be very relevant and important to do. But so personally, I'm comfortable with starting like this and then seeing where the needs come up along the way.
Do we need to appoint the school committee member today, or what?
You know, in my perfect world, I'd know that. So I
think that'd be great.
Started, but I don't know when we're meeting again. If it takes one more meeting, I'm sure that's doable.
We'll be able to do it today, I would think. I guess, a couple of things that I would just want to be on the record that, we will, as a committee, will expect, pretty detailed reports about how things are going and where they're headed. And certainly that input from members, whether we give it to you collectively at a meeting or individually, would be well considered. And because we are certainly loosening reins considerably on, what's hard to tell is, our sphere of direct responsibility and the spheres of influence. So,
I just assure you, no decision is going to be made that you aren't engaged with long before it's decided. So there won't be surprises like that for sure.
And do we have a general consensus that we can select somebody here tonight?
Yeah, let's just get the interest out. I mean, I think we asked people to share their interest.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to just share what responses we got. Cord had emailed us, I think before the meeting was even over, saying he was very interested. And then today, both Cynthia and Eva expressed interest. So I would say we should narrow it down to certainly one of the three of you. And does anyone want to kind of jump in with why they think they should be the one, or someone else should?
Unfortunately, I really think it has to be a Concord school committee member.
If it's just one, that's
I don't
probably true.
I just think it has to be.
Yeah, because it has to be somebody who's on both committees.
Yeah.
Eva, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, and I just wanted to chime in here to the same point.
Okay, thank you.
That if it's one person, yes, it should be really a Concord person. And I am perfectly happy just as an observer, just so I'm what is the best purpose for me to serve, the region and our Carlisle parents. So that flow of information and feedback coming back to Carlisle, and some feedback and suggestions coming to Lori. I don't have to use my voice during the meeting. There's we do all have an opportunity to meet with superintendent before a meeting. So I'm sure I'll have opportunities to express the ideas and the lot of information. So
great.
So I'll make a motion. I move that we nominate Court Booth to Lori's planning group.
Yeah, task force. I'll second that.
That's the first decision is what we're going to call it.
Right.
Again, something you get to do.
Yes.
Don't call it an advisory committee.
Be careful what you ask for. Is that what?
And
Play right back at you.
Court, we'll assume you're comfortable with that motion, given that you expressed immediate interest.
Well, like some others, I have a long background in education, and maybe it'll offer up something here. And I've got a background in health education as well. So these things are near and dear to me, but they are to all of us, I know. Yeah, I'd be happy to support the effort and work with Lori and represent you.
Personally, I will be very grateful that that you take it on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Good. Okay. So
Any other discussion on that front?
certainly thank Cynthia and Eva for being willing to put the time in necessary.
Very much so.
It's great, the interest, because I was worried no one is going to step up with all of the commitments.
But I think Court will be very good at this and sort of the inside baseball piece too, because he's been in the district for.
Well, and I guess the only other thing I would add is we need to continue to promote the idea of accommodation, forgiveness, in the sense that no school district is going to get this perfectly right. We don't even know what that looks like. All we can do is judge our efforts by how current we stay on conditions, how student and staff and family sensitive we remain, and how much educational soundness we can salvage through this. I'm not suggesting we're trying to lower our standards. What I'm saying is we, on a daily basis, are going to be dealing with standards that are not normally what occupy us every day. We don't normally think about family well every single day, or about Concord and Carlisle fiscal stability every single day. And I could go on for another 5 minutes, I won't. But all of those have become huge priorities. So I commend Lori for being willing to dive in. I think the structure of this is going to be very important, Lori. How you delegate, how you manage communication so that these, well over a dozen small task forces, all with their pockets of expertise, get pulled together in a comprehensive way so that because even you don't have a pair of roller skates fast enough to be at every one of these groups every time. So there's going to need to be good mechanisms to get information to you so that decision making can get made at your level and some at our level.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, good. So there was a motion, although our vote is not on the agenda until action items.
No, I'm sorry, the vote was just for Court.
Yeah. The vote doesn't
Oh, you're right,
pertain
'cause
now,
on
I
action
don't
items,
think exactly.
You're
Yeah.
right. So it's just to appoint him. Right. Okay. So then any further discussion before we take that vote?
Yes, we're appointing me to the superintendent's COVID-19 advisory committee.
Yes.
No,
No,
No.
let's be clear. Let's be clear. What is it? Put a name on it.
task force.
If it's the superintendent's, it can be anything you want,
Yeah,
as long as you have superintendent in there.
Yep.
Just to be clear, it's not a committee. And
Right. So let's call it the superintendent's COVID-19 task force. If
Fine.
that works with the superintendent.
Yep, we'll avoid the committee word.
Avoid the confusion of the committee word.
we'll let Erin figure that out when she has to write the motion.
So you made the motion, right, Cynthia?
Cynthia made the motion. I seconded.
Does it have to be for both?
Yes.
For both.
Yes. Then I can second. I'll second that for both. And then we should, if there's no other further discussion, we should take a roll call vote. Um, I'll run it through this time. Rainey,
Aye.
Booth,
Aye.
Modell,
Aye.
Mustafi,
Aye.
Johnston,
Aye for both.
and Bout. Aye for both. So it passes unanimously for both committees.
Great.
Right.
Thank
That's
you.
good. Thanks, everyone. That was a good discussion. And are we, so I think we're good on phase 4 remote learning discussion in terms of process and next steps and everything, right? Okay, great. Then there more of a budget update.
I mean, I'm looking at Jared. I don't know that he knows I'm looking at him, but I don't think we have a lot new information since Friday, but I'll let him.
Only a few days.
He did write a memo to the select board in Concord and the Board of Selectmen in Carlisle, so we can just talk on that for a minute. I don't think there's much else in terms of updates.
Right. Yeah, I wish just more rumors, but no truth to them.
Yeah.
So I am just about finished with the application for the 112 budget. The only real item that I need is the letter of support from the 2 select boards. And I sent a memo to you sort of that will go to them explaining why we use the alternative method, why it actually helps us in a way, because we don't rely on the net school spending amount that comes out when the governor passes his budget. And if they did not support this method, they would get assessed the statutory method in the 112th. And then once we get a budget, we would have to fix that, so they would be made whole. But it's based on the minimum local contribution amount, and we are way over that. And it could cause a swing one way or the other if they do decide to use the statutory method.
And Jared, really, it doesn't seem like there's any reason that they would want to decide to go with that, right? I mean, this is how we do it every year. So there's no expectation that they would disagree.
If I might, we have not received the fourth quarter circuit breaker payment. Is that correct?
You know what? I believe it might be. Ian gets that. I didn't ask for an update.
So
I will let you know in a few minutes.
So when we get that fourth quarter payment, we will know exactly, definitively, what we can carry over as a maximum next year, correct?
Well, I know what I'm getting.
Okay.
So those for FY20, that number's not going to change.
But we can
So,
carry over,
It's just under 1.1 million
1.1 at CPS.
at the high school,
At the high
and
school.
give or take 850 at CPS.
Thank you. So where I'm going with this is not tonight, but in the future, can you tell us whether we can be more aggressive about carrying over money in that account to next year?
I would love to make them both out.
Okay.
There's a little bit of room at CPS. I do anticipate maxing out the high school.
Good. Okay. Thank you. All right. Yeah, I think the more aggressive we can be about that, the better. Now that we know what we know about closeout.
Sorry. Yeah, in a minute. Shut that.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think too, we're not going to share all the rumors in public because they're kind of all over the place. So we're just hoping for some factual information over the next couple of weeks. I don't know what's reasonable to expect. Even date of delivery of information is widely ranging right now from, mid-June till well into July. So we will share what we know as we know it for sure.
Thank you.
In the meantime, we are doing that work to try to figure out how to best inform you of what we think we need, because that's still a huge part of the discussion, obviously.
You're talking about on the state side, the rumors.
On the state side, yes. And then we're doing the internal work to revisit things to try to see what the new conditions breed for rethinking the requests we've made to see how we can, revise those if possible.
Yeah. I will say, since Laurie brought in the zero-based budget, it's going to make the process easier because we did have a placeholder for everything. So we'll be able to identify monies if we don't need it and really put a dollar value towards it. And we might not have been able to do that in the past.
Agreed.
So Jared, just to confirm, you need the select board actually to take a vote?
Take a vote, and it can be, they can take a vote and then they can both sign this. Desi just wants to, they didn't really give great guidance on what that confirmation means.
Yeah.
But if I got it in the minutes or an email or something, it should fly.
Yeah, they're just looking to be sure we've engaged with the
No.
town
yeah.
leadership.
I think they posted their agenda. I didn't see this on it for this week
I
already.
did not send it. I wanted you all to see it first.
Got it.
And I have until the 1st of June. And if there's any delay on this piece, I'll get way ahead of it and I'll let the region department at DESI know.
So our plan will be to engage with the chairs of both Select Board and Board of Selectmen in Concord and Carlisle and ask to be on their next agenda. So we'll keep you posted on the timing of that.
Yeah,
And I think they're both meeting weekly.
sorry.
I think so.
For Concord, it's probably May 28th.
At least weekly.
Mm.
Yeah, we'll check with them first thing in the morning.
Okay.
So are we finished with that?
Think
I think
so?
so. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anything else that
Well,
anybody wants to bring up or?
speaking of meeting schedules, before we move off to executive session, I think we want to get some comfort level here for what our meeting schedule is and when we're meeting next. We had at one point talked about meeting weekly for a little while. That conversation was based on what had to happen when we thought we might be aiming for a June town meeting still. That's not happening. So I guess I wanted to get a feel from everyone, I think Wally and I both do, of what we're comfortable with here. Do we need to meet every week, or do we, kind of default to every other week and then add one if necessary in between? Which might be my recommendation, but I'd love to hear feedback. I just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with what we're doing. So
Crisis leadership suggests that communicating more frequently makes more sense. So in answer to your question, Heather, I guess what I would add is this question. Do we serve the communities of Concord and Carlisle better by adding to the superintendent's weekly Friday afternoon coffee with a brief weekly meeting of our own in the evening that's accessible to perhaps another group of constituents? And I say that not to advocate for it necessarily, but just to put it out there. Is it worth our effort to be more in touch with our constituencies by virtue of more frequent meetings, with the trade-off being keep them tight, keep them brief?
So that's an interesting point in terms of engagement opportunities for the public. I would say, though, if that was the goal, maybe we add to it by having, some school committee coffees that, two of us get on Zoom and the public can come and ask questions. I don't want to create extra work in terms of planning school committee meetings just to have a place for people to come and listen and ask questions. If there's work to be done, we should be meeting. Do you know what I'm saying? If the goal is more of a coffee style add to what Lori's already doing on Fridays, then maybe we do something similar to that. But
well, at the end of the day, time is time. Whether we have lengthy meetings every 2 weeks or tighter meetings every week, the time remains the same. The necessity for good facilitation from the chairs and time management remains the same. I'm I'm asking it from the perspective of what we think might go over well with the citizens of the two towns, because we're not a superintendent's coffee. We're an elected board, so we perform different roles.
Yeah, I think you get in a little trouble, frankly, Heather, if we have a coffee, again, we get back to the thing we just spent 45 minutes talking about, right? Two people, and, is it regularly scheduled, and are you deliberating? So I agree with Court, we're a committee. We're not just a PTO or something. And so that's one thing. I'll just point out that at Carlisle, I would keep it simple, right? At Carlisle, we meet every week, and we open each meeting with student presentations about what they're doing. Now, this is a grade school, so those are presumably a little more relevant to the parents who listen than maybe at the high school level. But we have a little section where the principals, talk about activities, and maybe some students do some things. And then we go to business, and whatever's on the agenda. To Court's point, if there's a little bit on the agenda, it's short, and if there's a lot, it's longer. But you're not going to really save time if you queue it all up for 2 weeks, right? So, we've been working hard to try to keep it to an hour and a half, or an hour to an hour and a half, and that's probably a good discipline. That includes everything. So, I'm, again, ironically, since I've always advocated for fewer meetings, in this particular time we're in, at least again for Carlisle, I found that the school committee meetings are a little bit of a social anchor for everybody to, listen in. Teachers like to listen in if there's student things going on. Parents certainly listen in. In our community, the selectmen and the FinCom occasionally is in, if they're interested in some part of it. So that's worked well for us. I'm sort of agnostic here, but if we did I don't see any harm in a weekly meeting. If it's regular, it is a meeting. I think we avoid the legal twist of not having a declared open meeting, and if we get into a conversation, we don't have to worry about it. So I guess that would be my vote for the current time until things settle down.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with the weekly. And for instance, next week, if we just got a brief update on how you're doing with your, whatever we're calling it.
Task force.
Yes. That would be useful, I think, to the community to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's 5 minutes or 25 minutes or pick your thing.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's assume we'll do weekly for a little while, and that we'll manage it. We're not going to create long meetings every 2 weeks. They'll be shorter and more often. And as Court said, it's up to Wally and myself to make sure we manage them and move them along and keep us efficient.
I'd want to ask the question, given that we're trying to get back to work, do we want to continue to have these for the time being during the day, or do we want to have 5 o'clock meetings?
Whatever works best for most people. So
For me, daytime is better, but I know for others it might be different, so I will be flexible.
How about a 3 o'clock in the afternoon sort of approach?
I'd say anything but 3 o'clock, because that's when we know Lori can reach people. Maybe we can offer up another time so we have another access point for people who are interested in school affairs.
what about 4 o'clock?
Yeah, and actually just on the terms of the day of the week, Court, some feedback I've gotten from some folks is they can't do Friday afternoons. I wonder if this meeting should be on a different afternoon so that people who can't get to the Fridays could access this. Just a thought. I did get some feedback on that people who are watching the recordings, I think, would love a live opportunity.
Yeah, and it's a lot of meeting time.
Still Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought we were sticking with Tuesday. Yeah.
I would like to stick to Tuesday.
Good, okay.
No reason not to.
Great.
So you guys don't like 5?
I do.
Yeah. I'm just,
Fine with me.
5 o'clock is my vote, but I'll go with the will of the committee.
Me as well.
Unless anybody's got an objection, let's do 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Sort of getting back toward normal.
Yep.
Still
Right.
an hour away, but
Closer at least. Okay, so we'll default to Tuesdays at 5, at least for the next few weeks, and we can reevaluate as we go.
okay. Should we give an opportunity here for public comment? I think we haven't done this. I have to ask the administrator if people raise their hand, which you can do from the participant.
Well, we can
button.
unmute them all or just ask them to raise their hand.
Why don't we do a raise hand thing, and then we either Heather or I could call on who's got the hand raised, and you unmute them. Does that work, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great if we can make that happen.
So if anybody has a comment to make, please just raise your hand on Zoom.
We caught them all off guard because we haven't been doing that.
Right, exactly.
So now we can get it back on the agenda. Yeah.
Find it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list of participants to make sure I can tell if someone's raising their hand.
I think everybody on here is pretty skilled at Zoom by now.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're okay then.
Okay.
So, take a motion to adjourn to region.
Well, so we need.
Wait.
What's that?
It took me a minute. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
Oh.
Nice, Carol. Yeah, it's the participant button. If you click on that, you can.
There wasn't one at the bottom. I had to click off my video because I wasn't on video.
Oh, okay.
That's
Hi, Carol.
I'm sorry. I just as a public comment wanted to add that I appreciate. I think Cynthia and Court suggested having a CPAC representative on the advisory committee, whatever the final decision was, and I'd like to definitely request that we have a CPAC representative on that committee.
And I would add Eva echoed that. And for the record, name and address, Carol.
Carol Yao, 44 Cross Street, Carlisle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thanks. Sorry, it took me a minute.
No
Okay.
worries.
So now we'll assume that everybody else had plenty of time.
Right.
Get their hand up.
And others out there, right?
So, motion to adjourn.
If there's nothing else, we have an executive session to move to.
Right.
So we would need, here, I have it in front of me. We would need a motion for both committees that the Concord School Committee and Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee will enter into executive session under Purpose 2 of the Open Meeting Law to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, and Purpose 3 of the Open Meeting Law to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and not return to open session.
So moved.
Is that for both?
For both. Thank you, Heather.
Second for both.
Terrific.
Thank you.
And we need a roll call again. Booth,
Aye for both.
Rainey,
Aye for both.
Mustafi,
Mustafi for region.
Modell,
Aye for region.
Johnston,
Aye for both.
and Bout is aye for both.
Hi, Heather. I'm sorry. We're running into a little bit of a license issue. So if you think you'll need more than 40 minutes for the executive session, we're just going to switch the hyperlinks for you.
I
I
think
think we
we're
will.
committed to keeping it to 40 minutes, right? Is that good for everyone?
So we'll go there immediately.
Right. So it's 6:20. We
That's
need to be
good
off
discipline,
before-
because when that thing runs out, it's like,
Exactly.
Runs out.
When the carriage turns back into a pumpkin, we are done.
that's it, man. They don't give you any warning on that one. They just.
Okay. We'll see you all there in a minute.